Today, I'm going to continue talking about the practice of Lojong by colleague Rinpoche. And I am going to be starting on slogan number 10, begin the sequence of exchange with yourself. This particular slogan is about self-obsession, thinking of ourselves as separately, individually created being in a world that we actually created ourselves, and our version of it is the only correct one, the only accurate one. Of course, this leads to all kinds of pain and suffering. We end up being trapped in a fantasy world and believing that it is the real world, and people that don't agree with us are somehow or another misguided or living in their own fantasy world, that they don't understand what reality really is. It leaves us being isolated. We believe in our projections. And so this slogan is referring to that we need to be motivated to go beyond that. So we start with ourselves. Again, if remember, he majored in philosophy, and he's got some words that perhaps are English rather than American English. So right off the bat, there is solipsistic. I had to look that word up. It pertains to the belief that only our own experience exists. There is nothing that is truly outside of ourselves. So now you know what that word means. And of course, in that kind of a state, there's no comfort, there's no ease there. You can't take a break from this state. It is, as I said, a separate reality. And Trungpa Rinpoche, he used the word cocoon as a metaphor. I kind of like that. The idea of a cocoon is something that an insect creates itself, surrounds itself in. And of course, it's very claustrophobic. Now, the good part of a cocoon is that it allows a metamorphosis and that a moth emerges from the cocoon. I think many of you, if not all of you, saw that Cecropia moth that showed up this summer at my place in the evening. It's got to be one of the most beautiful moths that are found on Earth. It's certainly the biggest one that is found as native to North America. To continue that metaphor of being in a cocoon because of our Buddha nature, that if we can emerge from the cocoon, we metamorphosize into something that is actually very, very beautiful. But in the meantime, we're stuck with afflictive emotions, at war with ourselves, harming others, in a lot of pain, delusion, and so forth. So we need to be motivated to overcome this very self-absorbed, separate world that we live in. We need to start thinking of the feelings and emotions of other beings in the world, and to let go of the painful things that we are experiencing and realize that A, they're temporary, and B, they're probably a lot less painful than what other people are experiencing right now. This reminded me of a quote by Gyalwang Karmapa. This comes from the book Interconnected, and I'm going to read the whole quote here. I sometimes describe egocentrism as a prison in which we have shut ourselves away from everyone and everything else. Our ego makes us prisoner. Only a limited few people or pets matter to us, and only they are allowed entry into our self-made jail. Everyone else is irrelevant, as if the world outside the prison doesn't really exist. Our own egocentrism and self-absorption act as the wardens that keep us shut off from the rest of the world. So we want to go beyond that. We want to become unstuck from this familiar, painful, separate world that we live in. The best way to break out is to think about others and their pain, and to use the power of our imagination. When we start realizing that the experience other people are having might actually be more painful and distressing than our own, we're going in the right direction. So he quotes Shanti Deva. I'll read the quote here. It's a simple quote. Those desiring speedily to be a refuge for themselves and other beings should interchange the terms of I and other, and thus embrace a sacred mystery. The point is that if you're feeling swamped in stress and worry, being overwhelmed by emotional problems, then we can start exchanging, first of all, with ourselves. We need to accept who we are before we really can accept other people. We need to stop this at being at war with ourselves, inner critic that we all have. So we start this exchange by actually working with ourselves. And this isn't necessarily talking about Tonglen, but it's accepting ourselves. It is seeking and looking for and then finding feelings of guilt, of inadequacy, of self-loathing. If you want to do Tonglen, fine, that breathe, exhale the causes of suffering and inhale the capacity to go beyond egotism and to develop positive emotions. Again, these teachings come from the Kadampa tradition. Treat all people and all things with respect. So we need to treat ourselves with respect. He says we need to brush our teeth, wash our plates, greet people out in the street, take care of our houses, fold our clothes, prepare our beds, and so forth. Don't just throw your clothes on the floor. In other words, respect yourself, respect your belongings, respect where you are living. He says, when we cook, cook with love. We should treat food with love. Cooking with gentleness was a Kadampa expression that he used. So that means preparing our meals with mindfulness. And it applies to everything in the environment, to be mindful about it, treat everything with respect. Cook with love reminded me of when I would go to the Monlam in Bodh Gaya, India. We stayed at a guest house, and there was this one young woman there who, well, the people that ran the guest house, one was a French woman and she married an Indian man. Among other things, they started this school that would take in poverty-stricken local people and give them a good education. And this cook that worked there, she was married. She had a young child that was nursing, and she put in long hours in this hot kitchen. By American standards, totally inadequate. It was just a burner that sat on the counter, and there was an LP tag on the floor that fed probably 2 or 3 burners on it, and then that's where she cooked. But she would say, I cook with love. And she meant it. She meant it. She really spent extra care cooking for us people that were staying at this guest house. So he says that houses should be neat, tidy, well-maintained, with a sense of care, love, awareness, and that this carries over. It keeps us feeling good, and this carries over to our interactions with other people. And I think I remember this. I am not going to say who said this, but the person is on my screen attending this class. After we did some Nyungnes here, she told me, you love your house and your house loves me. Those of you that have been here will realize that I've tried to keep the house uplifted, tried to keep it neat and organized and so forth, and it makes a difference. It really does. So when we develop this self-confidence and establish ourselves in a more genuine state of being, or he uses the word authentic state of being, we're not so worried about defending our territory, proving who we are to other people. And we can avoid being assertive. We can avoid blaming to build our self-confidence, that we can love ourselves, accept ourselves, see our faults, our mistakes. On the other hand, still want to improve and also understand interdependence. and realize that what we have and what we are experiencing, the good things in life, are there because of the work many, many beings have done that we benefited from. This allows us to let go of, even if it's a little bit, this fabricated identity that we have about ourselves. So that sums up this sequence of exchange with yourself that build up this self-confidence, and a huge difference between egotism and pride and so forth, and self-confidence, feeling that you have Buddha nature, feeling that you have these qualities that need to be developed, that you can do it, and that you no longer have to seek validation in other people. As I was reading this and now teaching this, reminded me of a story of a friend of mine that I met in graduate school back in 1968. I seemed to make friends with characters, and this man was a character. He has since passed away a few years ago, but he grew up in a totally dysfunctional family. He went to 20 different schools before he graduated from high school. His mother abandoned him, leaving him with his grandmother, and he had a very unique view of life. Well, when we were in graduate school together, he had a mental breakdown to the point that he ended up being locked up in a psychiatric institution. He got out. This was at the University of Minnesota, and he came right over to my house. Anyway, I called up his wife, and she called up the institution, and here come the police, and chaos breaks out. Well, he ended up in a psychiatric ward down in Missouri, which is where he came from, and he was getting electric shock treatment. And he said that he was almost like catatonic. And then suddenly he realized that he needed to take care of himself. And he started brushing his teeth every day. Then he started combing his hair. Then he started washing his face and added one more thing of personal care. And eventually they released him, went back home. His wife stayed with him. And he got involved in lots of different things. He was very, very smart. He started his own cab company. And as a result of that, he got involved in local Minneapolis politics because of the rules regarding cabs. So then he got involved in politics. He joined this poetic society that I think Garrison Keillor was a member of at one time. He started writing poetry. He said, I don't know which convention it was, but one of the DFL conventions in the 80s, he wrote a short poem and read it at the beginning of the convention. But it all started with him just being mindful and taking care of himself and respecting his body. And in fact, the man that I'm talking about, it was through him that I met Bill Hatton. So to kind of summarize the entirety of point number 2, which I just gave the last slogan, point number 2 covers the slogans 2 through 10. So here's a summary of this. First, that we meditate on absolute and relative bodhicitta by starting a session with refuge, then meditating on the preliminaries, which is actually slogan number 1. Then we go through slogans 2 through 6, and then rest in the natural state in shamatha meditation. Then we contemplate vipassana exercises, these preliminaries 2 through 6, on absolute bodhicitta. I'm going to repeat this. We start by taking refuge, then meditating on the 4 preliminary thoughts: precious human birth, impermanence, karma, and there's no satisfactory state in samsara. Then we meditate, doing shamatha meditation. Then we go through the vipassana slogans and exercises 2 through 6. 6 being in post-meditation, be a child of illusion. Then we go back to the natural state. The next step is to practice Tong Len, which is slogan number 7. So do the exchange using the breath. Visualize a person that you feel a lot of compassion for, or if necessary, an animal, a pet in front of you, and inhale their suffering and exhale whatever would be an antidote to that you have, your happiness, for instance. After that, he says, finish the meditation by reflecting on the 3 poisons, which is slogan number 8, and then slogan number 10, which is exchanging self for other. And finally, he says you can contemplate other slogans, which is really slogan number 9, which says use the slogans over and over again during the day. So you can pick out any slogan you would like to contemplate at that point, not just slogan number 9, just kind of opens up the door to any slogan. So the foundation of all of this, of course, is sitting meditation. And without sitting meditation, the rest of it won't work. So we need to have this strong basis in sitting meditation. These are Mahayana teachings. They're not the foundation level teachings. And we're training our mind to think differently, to see the world through different eyes. And we want to aim high, but avoid feeling that it's impossible to do. We want to have a can-do attitude, that this is possible. So it's important to look at these slogans individually as parts rather than a solid mountain or a solid wall, and work on the individual parts little by little as you're doing this practice. So when it says contemplate the slogans, pick out a slogan that you want to contemplate, think about during the day as you're going through the day. Don't try to, what would I say, think of all 59 slogans in one day and work on all 59. If you take it into parts, you can accomplish a lot over the long run. So it's a gradual process that gradually we change, we transform. And it's also important to do other practices along with the mind training, that if you are doing Nundro, to do Nundro. If you are doing a deity practice, continue doing that. But by doing all of this, we expand he uses the term mental horizons. Our capacity increases and we become more resilient. And I would define resiliency as that when difficulties arise, you quickly are able to process it and return to where you were before the difficulty, or perhaps even progress spiritually as a result of the difficulty. That's one of the beauties of mind training, and that leads right into point number 3, which is transforming adversity into the path of awakening. So now I'm going to go through some of the slogans in this 3rd section. We live in an imperfect world, that it is samsara, and it is filled with unpredictability and adversity. And while ultimately beings are perfect, they behave in harmful ways. We want stability, order, control, and we get chaos. We misinterpret others. We misinterpret ourselves. We have unrealistic expectations. We live in confusion. Henpo Karthar Rinpoche has talked about, we look at samsara or expect samsara to be perfected, that you can turn it into a diamond. And of course, you're wasting your time. Samsara is more like a lump of coal. Things happen due to interdependence, causes and conditions. There is no higher power involved in samsara. Shanti Deva is quoted here, quote, "Conditions once assembled have no thought. Now they will give rise to some result." I paused in a place that perhaps would have better not to pause. So I'm just going to read these two lines together. Conditions once assembled have no thought that will now give rise to some result, that it happens automatically, cause and effect. Conditions don't think, they just happen. So we have to be realistic about what we can and cannot do. And we have to realize what our expectations are. We can aspire to make things better. This is what Bodhisattva activity is all about. But again, quoting Shanti Deva, and I am giving a different translation of these lines than Prahlad Rinpoche used in the book. If the problem can be solved, why worry? If the problem cannot be solved, worrying will do you no good. So we need to have some equanimity as we are going through life and through the difficult circumstances that we face in life. I remember one of my first visits to KTD. They had what they call out in New York, a soda machine in the dining area. Here in the Midwest, we call it a pop machine. So I watched Barter Tulku Rinpoche go over to the soda machine, put money in it, push the button, and nothing came out. You can be highly realized and samsara still doesn't work. I think that's a very important point to make. Sometimes I think that what life is just problem solving, facing one difficulty after another. I loaded up my pickup truck with scrap iron to take to the junk dealer. It was working just fine to drive it around and put the stuff in. Then I'm ready to go to the junk dealer. I start it up. I back up 3 feet and the engine dies. I go get a battery, put a new battery in it. It still won't start, doesn't even turn over, in case you're wondering. So it sits right now, you might say dead in the water if it was a boat. One of these days I'll have to get a mechanic over here or get someone to help me pull it to town to a mechanic and work on it. But I mean, this is the way life works for me. And I think you will agree that this is the way your life works too. So these difficulties actually are an opportunity that we can use to awaken, to change our way of thinking rather than seeing it as an obstacle to our goals. We cannot control events. We can't control other people, but we can control our responses to what goes on in our life and how other people react to us and so forth. Misfortunes can be aids to our growth. We can use them to develop courage, fortitude, to train our minds to be more accommodating and understanding that there are actually wonderful opportunities that we can take advantage of. So this text here, it advises us to accept adversity, to take responsibility for our negative actions, and then apply the method of removing this self-obsession that causes us to look at these things as problems. He talks about the story of Atisha bringing a difficult Bengali servant with him when Atisha came to Tibet. The idea was that Atisha, his main teaching was these mind training slogans. And he had heard that the Tibetans were nice people and that he needed a difficult person to be around him to help him work with these mind training slogans. And of course, after being in Tibet for a while, he sent the Bengali servant home because the Tibetans were difficult enough for him. He didn't need to have a difficult attendant to boot. So to kind of sum this up, these slogans here, the whole Lojong practice is about strengthening our mind instead of giving in to despair in the face of adversity. And now this brought 4 lines of a poem by William Blake to mind. So I'm going to read it. It seems like it fits right in here. Love seeketh not itself to please. nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives its ease and builds a heaven in hell's despair. That kind of sums up this point of mind training, that by working with others, by working with difficulties and so forth, that we have actually a lot of potential. We don't have to run away from difficulties. If we harden ourselves to suffering, we just become more susceptible to it. The Tibetans say if you destroy one enemy, 10 more will appear. Lojong reverses this whole mechanism of habitual patterns and ego. Again, it focuses on our own choices and how we respond to others. And we go stronger and more resilient by becoming more open to these difficulties, more open to others, and our world grows and we grow. So we kind of own our own choices, take responsibility for them, and as opposed to thinking, well, he made me do it, or she made me do it, or I didn't have any choice, yada, yada, yada. We can start seeing our entrenched habits and our inner compulsions and so forth, and realize that they're really a pain. They cause us all kinds of suffering, and we can change. If we can recognize our ego, how it reacts, how we have these impulses that seem deeply ingrained, by seeing them, it gives us the chance to change. So he ends this introductory section with a quote that I'm just going to read. It's the last few words in this introductory section to part 3. The main criteria is that we never give up in the face of adversity, no matter what kind of world we are confronted with at the personal or political level. When we think there is nothing we can do, we realize there is something we can do. We see that this something is actually quite tremendous. Slogan number 11 is, when beings and the world are filled with evil, transform unfavorable circumstances into the path of enlightenment. So the choice is very simple. We're going to see adversity as a path for growth, or take a defeatist attitude. Tralek Rinpoche says that a defeatist attitude is actually at war with yourself. You're fighting yourself, you're fighting with others, and it just makes things worse. So we need to continually examine our negative responses and kind of ask ourselves, are they really accomplishing anything important? Or is it more just a habitual pattern that I keep responding in this way? I remember hearing this, and this is a pattern that even corporations can have. It's not working, therefore I have to do more of it until it does work. And then you're back doing the same old, having the same old results, and wondering why you're frustrated and unhappy and so forth. However, if we see adversity as a path to growth, we can respond with courage, fortitude, and understanding. We can have a feeling of self-worth. It's definitely possible to have much better outcomes with this kind of an attitude. You work with problems rather than against them. One of my favorite phrases is to look at difficulties as manure versus crap. Manure is a resource for growth out here in the country. It's very fertile if it's used properly. And that is this attitude of using adversity as a growth mechanism. And this does not encourage being a victim or being abused. He says in the West that this is misunderstood, but this is actually using love, compassion, and wisdom to become a better person, to develop dignity, depth, and so forth. So this slogan is about the development of compassion. This is about altruistic motivation joined with insight. Skill in means is the term that he uses. Here are three different takes on this skill in means, transforming adversity into the path of awakening. The first meaning is skill in means related to relative bodhicitta. The second is skill in means in an absolute bodhicitta. And the third is special skillful means. And the special ones meaning paying attention that we avoid the victim mentality when we're contemplating any of the following slogans. And victim mentality means that you are feeling, you might say, picked on. You're feeling that other people are doing these things to you and you are powerless to do anything about it. And it leaves you helpless. It leaves you feeling angry, but there's no way out. And so we want to especially avoid this victim mentality. Now, he goes into the special means of relative bodhicitta. So that's where I'm going next. Difficulties are unavoidable. Suffering is optional. Most of our emotional responses are reactions to our interpretations. So we're not reacting to what's actually happening. We're reacting to our interpretations of what's happening. And we can learn to be less reactive. Victims are powerless, and victims get angry pretty quickly because they feel powerless. As I talked about at the beginning, everyone lives in their own separate reality, their cocoon, their bubble. Take your pick how you want to describe it. Karmapa used the idea of a prison cell. So we need to re-examine the results of our own actions, what works, what doesn't work, and any experience, the effect of it will be more serious, more profound if we continue to dwell on it rather than investigating what's really going on. I had an inmate when I was working in the prison. I'm sure he was at least 30 years old. He was very, very smart. He had a very good grasp of technology. I retired from the prison job, it was 2011. So this would have been sometime, maybe early 2000s, that he got incarcerated. And he got incarcerated out of scamming PayPal. That's how good he was with computers. I wouldn't know how to begin to scam PayPal, but he was in for that. And he told me one time, when I was a child, I was sexually assaulted, and there's nothing I can do about that. That's being a victim, and that is letting your thoughts about this experience, because all he's dealing with now is the experience. This happened maybe 20 years ago. He's stuck because he just keeps reliving it over and over and over again, feeling powerless. There's nothing that he can do about it. And he had a very serious anger management problem, to the point that they sent him to segregation or solitary confinement for the safety of others. So we need to investigate the real causes of suffering and realize that it's our fixation that amplifies any negative impact that we have with what we run into. It's easy to say to a person, but very difficult for them to really grasp it. The past is past. You can't have a better past, and you don't have to bring the past into the present. But to go on here, he quotes Chandra Kirti: attachment to one's own belief, aversion for another's view, all this is thought. So the challenges and the difficulties that we run into actually add to the richness of living. if we really can see it that way as, again, manure for growth, that the whole situation looks different. We have this tendency, of course, to lean towards laziness, but if we can take an attitude of wanting to put some energy into it, some courage, and so forth, that we will derive much more benefit from it. If we complain about our misfortunes, if we keep finding fault with what we have and focusing on what we don't have, we will progress and possibly we will regress. This is an observation I made at work again when I was working in the prison, was that the staff that complained the most did the least work. I don't know if anyone else has had that experience, but it's amazing how difficult work can be if you're thinking all the time about how difficult work is, and how easy work is if you start thinking about how, well, this is pretty easy actually, and maybe trying enjoying it. So we can develop real character if we use these difficult situations that we run into in life to tame our egotism, disrupt our ingrained habitual patterns. When we blame others, we're really only giving them the power over us. We are disempowering ourselves. When we take responsibility for our own lives, on the other hand, we empower ourselves. This is an antidote for feeling that others have a power over us. And it reduces the emotional dramas and the negative states of mind that we can fall into. So to sum up today's talk, take responsibility for your lives and let go of any tendency to feel that you are a victim.